It's all fun and margaritas until someone dies. Cruise ships promise the ultimate vacation, a floating paradise where nothing can go wrong. But when the Reaper books the cabin next door, the crew faces a problem no brochure mentions. What do you do with a body at sea? It's a side of cruising most never think about, yet every ship quietly prepares for it. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're revealing what happens when you die on a cruise ship. When people think of deaths on a cruise, they picture something spectacular. Someone falling overboard after one too many drinks. Sure, those accidents happen, but they are rare. In 2024, there were hundreds of cruise ship deaths, and only 19 involved people going overboard, 18 of them fatal. Most cruise ship deaths aren't dramatic at all, because the Reaper doesn't take a holiday. On a ship packed with thousands of passengers, many die in their golden years. Health problems are part of the baggage. Someone might die in their sleep or suffer a heart attack over dinner. And in close quarters, disease spreads fast, from norovirus to COVID-19. And the longer the cruise, the higher the odds. When most people think of cruises, they picture those quick, casual trips to the Bahamas, the kind every major company offers. You hop on for a few days, enjoy the ship, maybe a token island stop, and then it's back to real life. But those are for amateurs. Veteran travelers go big, transcontinental voyages to Europe or Asia that last weeks, visiting multiple countries in one trip. And that is just the warm-up. Celebrity cruises run 17-night trips to Fiji, 19 nights to Tahiti, and a jaw-dropping 110-night journey spanning 15 countries. But Royal Caribbean takes it even further. Its viral and very controversial Ultimate World Cruise lasts 274 days, visiting over 60 countries and 8 world wonders. At that point, you're not a vacationer, you're basically a resident, which means the ship has to be prepared for anything. Cruise ships know that anything can happen on board, and they're equipped with facilities for emergencies. That includes temporary brigs should someone violate the rules of the sea and have to be removed at the next convenient port. There's also medical facilities for monitoring illness and treating injuries. This is all a part of the cruise ship's functioning as essentially a mobile city. But sometimes things go south, and they're prepared for that too. Cruise ships are a little cagey about deaths on board. After all, no one wants to think about making that last port of call. But information is available from some unusual sources. Fort Lauderdale's Port Everglades, one of the most popular cruise ports in the world, reported that 91 bodies were brought off board between 2014 and 2017. Insiders report that the average is about 3 deaths on cruise ships per week worldwide, with the vast majority being elderly passengers who died of natural causes. And that means by now, the process is well in hand. Cruise ships have some of the best refrigeration systems in the world. After all, they have to store a massive amount of food for weeks at a time. But that's not the only thing being refrigerated. Every ship has, far from public view, a cold room, a small morgue that can hold several bodies in a sanitary, temperature-controlled space. The largest ships can store up to 10. And as soon as a death happens, everyone springs into action. One of the biggest parts of running a cruise ship is maintaining order, so in the event of a death on board, it's unlikely the ship will make any announcement. If someone dies in their cabin, the room will be secured and the body will be removed quickly. The hallway may be briefly cordoned off, and some people might be asked to stay in their rooms briefly to allow the medical workers to efficiently take care of the situation with as little distress and alarm as possible. Of course, that might not always be an option. It's just as likely for someone to die at the worst possible time. They could be dancing the night away, digging into a plate of pasta, or laughing at the evening's comedy show when their old ticker suddenly calls it quits. And since nobody wants to sip their caipirinha next to a corpse, the ship's medical team would rush in as fast as possible. The area would be cleared, the body removed, and the room sanitized. Most deaths on cruise ships are due to natural causes, illness, or the body simply giving out. But there have been far more disturbing incidents. Fatal accidents where someone falls over the railing and into the sea. When that happens, there would be far more security around the death scene, as the body would have to be preserved for future examination. Because what happens on a cruise doesn't always stay on the cruise. Cruise ships often operate in international waters, but they are heavily regulated not just by the country they're flagged in, but by each country's port they visit. When someone dies on board, one of the crew's first steps is to report it to the proper authorities. For U.S. ships, that means notifying the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC runs port health stations, formerly called quarantine stations, which handle any potential disease risks coming off of the ship. And of course, in some cases, it's not just about containment. The U.S. Cruise Vessel Safety and Security Act was passed in 2010. That requires all suspicious deaths, missing persons, or criminal-related deaths to be immediately reported to the FBI. This applies to most accidental deaths, even when the cause seems obvious from the start. Cruise lines work closely with health and safety agencies around the world, so this rule applies globally. It's the first step in handling a death at sea, making sure all the legal boxes are checked. However, these days the cruises have to be prepared for larger-scale crises as well. Cruise ships were one of the very first places to be hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many liners set sail with infected people on board long before anyone knew how dangerous the virus was. Cruise ships are the perfect storm for disease. Thousands of people are sealed inside one floating box, and a virus spreads in no time. And that means the crew might not be dealing with one potential death. It could be dealing with a lot. The one advantage of this is that the crew can prepare. People are unlikely to die suddenly in this kind of situation. The crew would know who is sick, whether it's COVID-19 or something more mundane like the norovirus, and if there are only a few cases, the person might be quarantined in the medical facilities where their health can be monitored. If it's a more widespread illness, those infected may be asked to hunker down in their cabins with regular visits from the medical staff. This allows the crew to prepare for the worst and divide the morgue as needed. Of course, in some situations, even the best-laid plans can sink fast. It was the one cruise no one wanted to be on, the Carnival Poop Cruise. Thanks to a devastating power failure, a Carnival cruise ship wound up stranded in the Caribbean for 5 days in 2013. The total loss of power knocked out the ship's cooling systems, causing it to massively overheat, and when the bathrooms failed, sewage started flooding the decks. These conditions, plus the shortage of food, led to a massive outbreak of illness, causing the main ship deck to be turned into a makeshift sickbed. No one died on this ship, fortunately, but even the best-laid plans can go sideways if the situation goes out of control enough. But in most cases, the goal will be normalcy on the surface. Except in truly unusual circumstances, it's likely that all normal activities on the cruise will resume shortly after a death on the ship. Sometimes a section of the ship gets closed off for cleaning and inspection, but if someone dies of natural causes in their cabin, most passengers won't even know it happened, unless they were right next door. After all, everyone paid a small fortune for this trip. No one wants their vacation spoiled by something as inconvenient as death. But word always gets around. Maybe someone notices their usual slot machine neighbor isn't there that morning, or a friend of the deceased spouse stops by to check in. On a ship with thousands of people, everyone's a part of a small web of connections, and those connections have their own. And before long, the news spreads like wildfire, and what happened next is up to everyone on board. Do you still feel comfortable doing that nightly bar crawl with Kevin in the morgue? Are you gonna pull that one-armed bandit in his memory and dedicate the jackpot to him? For most people, life and the cruise will simply go on. Cruise ships are extremely reluctant to cut a voyage short, make an unscheduled stop, or do anything that might disrupt the trip. Sure, there are exceptions, such as a medical emergency that requires off-board medical attention, or a passenger who found themselves in the brig and needs to be handed off to local authorities. But in most cases, a death means the ship keeps on sailing. When it comes to the friends and family of the deceased, the crew is prepared. Some staff members are specially trained to provide emotional support to those who are grieving. These are typically members of the guest care team, and they'll be assigned to focus on this case, both to allow the people to vent to them and to help them with the many logistics of the death. Because, fair or not, the grieving family will have to make some big decisions about their loved one's final care almost immediately, and it could be costly. First, the deceased's family has to decide if they want to stay on board. They'll be provided with free internet and phone service in case they need to make arrangements. Depending on where the cruise is located, they can choose to disembark at the next port and proceed from dry land. Many people don't feel like continuing a cruise when they just lost a loved one, of course, but in some cases it is the only feasible option. Few people would choose to disembark in another country, and all the while the cruise ship staff is working. The first thing that happens once the body is secured is that the ship's doctor is called to the morgue. This is usually for a cursory examination. The doctor is not expected to perform an autopsy. Most cases of death on a cruise ship are natural, so there are unlikely to be any suspicious circumstances unless the murder mystery night went a little too well. The goal is simply to record the condition of the deceased, make a reasonable conclusion about the cause of death, and preserve the information along with the body. Having a death on a cruise can be a downer. It's hard to enjoy the cruise, but staff will always do their best to continue the vacation vibe. There have been anecdotal reports of cruise ships announcing a free ice cream party out of nowhere after the death of a passenger. But those legends also say there's a much darker reason behind the cruise's sudden display of generosity. Is the cruise ship looking to clear up space? In 2024, a TikTok video went viral claiming that when someone dies on a cruise, the crew throws an ice cream party. Not out of kindness, but to clear freezer space for the body. It makes a great story, but there's no evidence behind it. Yet it shows how fascinated people are by what happens when death visits paradise. Since families usually remain on board, the body does too, kept in the morgue until the next port, when local authorities take over. How it's handled from there depends on the nearest country's rules, and that is where the red tape begins. And it can make a bad situation worse. In standard Caribbean cruises, by far the most common voyage, the body is typically kept on board and offloaded when the ship returns to the U.S. This will usually be followed up by the body being transported to the local morgue for a more thorough examination and the issuing of a death certificate. From there, it's up to the family to figure out how to transport the body home. Cruise ships do not offer assistance with this part of the situation, although many trip insurance plans do offer coverage for repatriation. But for guests further away, things can get tricky. Today's cruise ships set sail around the world. Some of the longest voyages include South Pacific voyages that visit several small islands and African and European ports around the Mediterranean. These involve much longer voyages across the ocean and feature both larger challenges in getting a body back home and more onerous regulations depending on the country. Some countries, like small Pacific Island nations, don't have the infrastructure for repatriating, while some ports won't allow human remains off the ship to begin with. But fortunately, the USA has a very long reach. Almost every country has a U.S. embassy or consulate, and the ones that don't, where the U.S. doesn't have diplomatic relations, are highly unlikely to be visited by cruise ships. That's why, if it's necessary to offload a body for examination and repatriation in a foreign country, one of the first calls will be to the nearest U.S. consulate. When officials step in, they take over from the crew as the family's main contact. They work with local authorities and help plan on how to bring the body home or back on board for transport. If the person was traveling alone, the consulate steps up handling their affairs until a relative can take over. One of the most challenging situations happens when a cruise ship passenger is at a port of call. The ships often offload people for a day at an island port or a city for exploration, dining, and drinking, with strict warnings to be back before it's time to set sail. But along the way, anything can happen. In one case, a passenger died on a tiny island in the South Pacific. The crew had to bring the body back to the ship, then offload it again at a larger island in French Polynesia for examination before it could finally be sent to Tahiti for transport back to the U.S. It was bureaucracy at its absolute worst. As tragic as death on a cruise ship is, it's not always entirely unexpected. Many of the people who die on ships knew they didn't have too much time left, and as much as no one likes to talk about it, this isn't an unexpected event for anyone. It's estimated that over 37 million passengers will set sail on a cruise ship this year, and that means that a certain number of deaths on board are inevitable. The cruise ships have developed a well-oiled system to handle these deaths. For most of the passengers on board, it's simply background noise. Some may be briefly inconvenienced by it, others may not even know about it at all, which makes this part of how cruise ships operate. And that means that even when a death happens on board, the cruise crew will be working to make sure everything feels normal, and most people will be back to enjoying themselves very quickly. Because after all, death is a part of life, and there is no reason to let it interrupt a good vacation or margaritas. Dying on a cruise ship is disturbing enough, but that is far from the only bizarre thing that's happened at sea. Watch crazy but true stories that happened on cruise ships to hear the wildest tales from the open ocean, or click on this video instead.